Clovis first, that really bad idea, that true pseudoscience. They call me and my colleagues pseudoscientists, but Clovis first is a classic example of pseudoscience, which maintained itself for far too long. Now that that's been dispensed with, well, why has it been dispensed with? It's been dispensed with because gradually new information has come forward which can't be disputed, which shows that human beings were living in the Americas long before that. And that's why we start with episode 1 of season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, looking at the human footprints that were found in White Sands, New Mexico. And these footprints, you can't date the footprints themselves, but what they've succeeded in doing is ancient seeds that were embedded in many of the footprints.
23,000 years.
And they go back 23,000 years into the past. So that on its own blows Clovis first completely out of the water. Never mind the presence of sites going back 30 or 40,000 years in South America. Now, there's much more. There are much earlier sites. I've chosen to focus in the first episode of season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse on those footprints from New Mexico because hardly anybody now in the archaeological community disputes that. There was a time when they first published that information, when those archaeologists who'd made those finds were attacked, but they doubled down and they backed up their case and they found other ways of dating, and now it's just accepted universally that those footprints are 23,000 years old. And it's a very intimate connection with fellow humans from 23,000 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, if we know there were humans in South America, even long before that, thousands of years before that, it's not shocking that humans...
Well, it shouldn't be shocking, but you have to understand that there's been a rigorous fight back against any suggestion that humans were in South America before humans were in North America.
Okay,
Again, that is beginning to crumble in the face of new evidence. Tom Dillehay at Monte Alban, Monteverde in South America was one of the first to come up against this opposition, but he proved that site had been settled much earlier than was previously accepted. There's a whole argument about sites in South America, which I suspect eventually will go the same way as Clovis first, because the information is in fact extremely compelling. But I chose to focus on White Sands because that's an area where I'm not in any dispute with mainstream archaeology. They can't say, oh, this is a hoax or this is a fraud, because they absolutely accept that is the case. But, for example, if you go to San Diego, the San Diego Natural History Museum, you will see an exhibit there about what is called the Cerruti Mastodon site. And this was, the lead excavator was Tom Demaray of San Diego Natural History Museum. I know him. I've been and interviewed him for my book, America Before. He and his team found evidence that human beings had been present just south of San Diego 130,000 years ago. That's so much, I mean, that's 10 times older than Clovis and way older than those footprints in New Mexico. And naturally, and he first published this in Nature. I mean, to get an article which is overturning the story of the peopling of the Americas published in Nature is no easy task. That went through a rigorous peer review process, and it was published. It's never been retracted, but it's been attacked a lot. And those attacks have been refuted by Tom Demaray and his team. But I didn't bring that up in season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, because I know that there's so much noise and fuss and nonsense around it. The main point I wanted to make with those footprints is we now know for sure that the Americas have been inhabited for a very long time.
Right.
And during that time period, archaeologists haven't really been looking for what those human beings might have been doing. So the answer to the question is of how do I differ is I think that the 130,000-year-old date is solid. I think it's really solid. Yeah. These are mastodon bones that were broken open, fractured by human activity to extract the marrow from the bones. We don't know for sure they were anatomically modern humans. They might have been Denisovans, they might have been Neanderthals, but they were doing human-like things. That extraction of marrow using tools is classic human behavior. I'm not saying they were an advanced civilization, but I'm saying they were there. Right. And once we begin to take on board the notion that human beings might have been in the Americas for 130,000 years, which is far longer than human beings, anatomically modern humans, were in Europe, then we're really bound to investigate what they might have been doing, rather than just saying, we don't need to look at that period for human activity because we know it wasn't there. We have to look and see what was happening. And that's a process that's beginning to unfold now.
Good. Yeah, when we look at South America, for me, and you think about an ice age and going back, where the ice age, quote unquote, ended. Well, maybe we'll get into whether or not it actually ended.
Yeah, arguably we're in an interglacial.
Exactly, an interglacial right now. But that began, the interglacial period began about 12,800-ish years ago.
A little bit later than that. 12,800 years ago, we were still in the ice age, and 12,800 years ago was the, again, this language, last ice age. You're right. What we live in now, the Holocene, is regarded as an interglacial period, that we're part of a much longer sequence of ice ages, and there will be future ice ages.
So it's going to get cold again.
It's going to get cold again. That's as it has done over millions and millions of years.
Yep.
But 12,800 years ago, the world had actually been warming up quite nicely. And it was significantly warmer than it was at the last glacial maximum, which is about 21,000 years ago. It was still definitely an ice age, but the world was getting a much more comfortable place to live. And then suddenly there was a massive plunge of global temperatures, a rise in sea levels at the same time, and evidence of cataclysms all around the world. Right. This is why we call my series Ancient Apocalypse, because I regard that moment. It's referred to geologically as the Younger Dryas. It's an episode of really weird climate that affected the Earth between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. So if you're looking for a real date for the end of the last ice age, if we're going to call it would be 11,600 years ago.
Right.
That's when the final collapse begins, and we have this huge pulse of meltwater going into the world ocean called Meltwater Pulse 1b, and that truly is the beginning of the modern epoch, which is called the Holocene.
Right. So 11.6, and humans we know go back at least a couple of 100,000 years, and probably more. Homo sapiens like us.
Yeah, Homo sapiens like us. This is also a story that's a work in progress. I can remember a time not so long ago, back in the 1990s, when it was thought that anatomically modern humans were very recent, but only 50,000 years ago or so.
Right.
And then there was discoveries in Ethiopia of anatomically modern human remains, which were just under 200,000 years old, about 196,000. And then there was a discovery in Morocco, at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, of anatomically modern human remains that were 310,000 years old. Keeps on getting pushed back. I wouldn't be surprised if evidence is found even earlier of that of anatomically modern humans, but at that time, those anatomically modern humans were coexisting with what we can only reasonably describe as other human species. Right. The Neanderthals were a human species. They're not called Homo neanderthalensis for nothing. They're part of the Homo species. And Homo denisovans, the Denisovans, these are cousin species, very closely related to anatomically modern humans, so closely related that anatomically modern humans and they were able to interbreed successfully. And we still carry Neanderthal and Denisovan genes within us today. Right. And gradually it's beginning to realize that these archaic human species with whom anatomically modern humans interbred were much more sophisticated than had previously been realized. Neanderthal used to be a word that was used for sort of thuggish, ignorant, Stone Age, brute behavior. Because there was this negative idea of people in the Stone Age. Of course, they weren't thuggish or brutish at all. They were just exactly like us. But you can still insult somebody by referring to them as a Neanderthal. Well, the new evidence shows that the Neanderthals were sensitive, they were creative, they created art, and it's very possible that they taught anatomically modern humans how to do art as well. So we have to open our minds to the achievements of these cousin species that existed as well. But to be specific, anatomically modern humans, the earliest finding is about 310,000 years ago. And that's one of the things that bothers me is when you've got all the anatomically modern kit, all the stuff that we use to make our great civilization, why do you wait 310,000 years or 300,000 years before you start applying that?